Hey, welcome back. My name's Justin. Today I want to talk about the best electronic drums for venues. So if you're like the manager or the music director of like a theater, a church, concert halls, clubs, basically a building with a stage, you need to buy a house kit, and you've decided electronic is the way you want to go, this video should be helpful. But first, today's video is brought to you by Edrum Center. If you're shopping for high-end electronic drums, go check out Edrum Center first. They're based in Tennessee, they've got a very knowledgeable staff, and there's a discount code to them in the description of this video. Okay, so first up, let's cover some stuff to avoid before you click the buy button on anything from any website. The first thing to avoid is trying to build the drum set yourself. Don't try to do a DIY conversion. Buying something off the shelf from a major company you can trust is better in this situation than trying to build a weird DIY Franken drum set. And I'm saying this as somebody who has one of those behind me right here. So just buy something off the shelf. Something else to avoid is buying this drum set without talking to the drummers who will actually be playing this. Usually the person who is buying it isn't the actual drummer, it's the manager, it's the music director, and they tend to be piano players or singers or something. So just get them on board before you drop $4,000 and then get confused why they don't like the kit. The next thing I would avoid is buying a low volume setup and then miking it. Sometimes people get this sort of big brain idea that they're not going to go full acoustic or full electronic. They're going to go in the middle, get an acoustic set, then put mesh heads on top, acoustic heads on the bottom, low volume cymbals, Zildjian L80s, and then miking the thing. They think this is a weird shortcut that will save them money and also give a more realistic look and feel. The problem is, it may be fun to play, but it sounds like trash. Something else I would avoid is buying an electronic drum set with metal cymbals, either triggered low volume cymbals or full on, this is a B20 bronze electronic metal cymbal. While they look amazing, they have too much stage volume. That's great for home use, for studio use, for shooting drum covers, and for live use maybe if the venue is big enough so the audience can't hear it. Now on a related note, I would also not buy an electronic drum set if you have an ultra small space. You wouldn't buy an electronic drum set for that space because the audience will hear the sound of you hitting the drums more than the sound of the drums coming out of the PA system. I made this mistake once. I tried to play live at a place that was a little bit too small for my electronic drum set. I didn't realize it was a problem until I was in the audience and I had my cousin play, and I realized I was getting annoyed by the sound of him hitting the cymbals. So the next time I was there, I switched over to a cajon. Again, this is for small spaces. Most people probably won't have this problem, but if your space is overly small, then you cross over to the point where electronic drums don't make sense. Just wanted to mention that. I feel like most people don't talk about this very often. Let's talk about a few pre-buy questions you need to ask yourself, which will help you whittle down what kind of drum set you might need from the list of suggestions that I've got. First pre-buy question is, will the drum set be visible on stage? For some people, this may sound ridiculous. Of course, it's going to be right there front and center. But for other kinds of venues or other kinds of people that play live, the drum set and the whole band may be sort of off in the shadows. They're not the main event. They're backing up some sort of other thing. Or maybe the drum set's in a whole different room with a window. I've seen that multiple times. Or maybe the drum set is in an orchestra pit. I've seen an electronic drum set there before as well. So if that's the case, you can buy a pad-based electronic drum set. This will perform just as good as the fancy, acoustic-looking electronic drums, but they just don't have a giant acoustic-looking shell, and that can save you some money. Meanwhile, if the drum set is going to be right there in front of everybody, you want the audience to have something nice to look at. You probably want to spend a little bit more money and buy something that looks acoustic-like if you want to have better stage presence. The next question to ask yourself is, how many outputs do I need to send to front of house? Cheaper electronic drums, they're only going to give you right and left, two master outputs. Then if you spend more money, then you get drum sets that have 4 outputs. So that way you can have 1 be kick, 2 be snare, then the rest be grouped in 3 and 4. Then if you spend $5,000 on up, all of a sudden all the drum companies start selling electronic drums that have individual outputs for every single input. So just keep in mind, if you want all the outputs, you're going to have to spend more money. Meanwhile, if you're okay doing a lot of early A/B testing, really nailing the mix pre-show, then you can buy a drum set that has less outputs. It's just going to be up to you. How big is your budget and how many outputs do you want? As far as brands go, I basically recommend Japanese companies for live venues and for playing, concerts and stuff. This is because they just have a very long track record, or they're trusted more, they have better resale value. Just overall, Japanese companies, they just make good electronic drums. This isn't to say that I'm telling you you're not allowed to go buy a Millennium or an Alesis or whatever drum set. If you want to buy a budget brand, that's up to you. But for most venues, spending the extra money, getting something that, professionals use every day, live on stage, is probably the better bet. All right, so now let's move ahead to drum set recommendations. To make things a little bit more simple, because I do have quite a few kits to go through here, I'm going to group this into pad-based drums at first, and then move over to acoustic-looking drums separate. And I'm also going to move in $1,000 price increments, so no matter what your budget is, I should have a kit that should, fit your needs. Beginning with pad-based electronic drums, if you're in the ultra budget price range, which unfortunately is going to be a hair under $2,000, the two best drum sets at this price range, in my opinion, are the Yamaha DTX 6K3X and the Roland TD17 KV2. Both these drum sets are great. The Yamaha one will sound a little bit nicer, and the Roland one has better pads. So it depends on what you prioritize there. For me, I would probably go with the Roland one, but again, either of these drum sets are very good. The Yamaha one is on sale right now for a pretty heavy discount, so it will be the cheaper of the two options. Now moving up to $2,000 to $3,000, so you got the Yamaha DTX 8 series for about $2,800. You get a bit of a shell, they look nicer. Some of the pads are larger as well. Same module though. Overall, it's a really nice kit that you could use live very easily. Just like the previous ones, it's only got two outputs. Then you got Roland's option, which is currently $2,500. This is the Roland VAD 307. And then you got the F-Note 3X, which is larger. You get like a two-piece 14-inch hi-hat, you get 18-inch ride cymbal, you get four toms. The module is not as complicated or has as many options as Roland or Yamaha, but it's got very natural sounds built in. The F-Note one also has the advantage of being able to give you four direct outputs if you split the headphone jack. So you have the master right and left outs, and then you have the headphone jack that you can split. So you can have kick and snare be separate outs, and then group everything else in 3 and 4. The only downside to me is that the F-Note module just doesn't have as many options as far as editing and stuff, and I do think the Yamaha one does sound better. Now moving up to $3,000, this is where Roland gives you their best value per dollar in their whole lineup. The TD27 KV2 gives you their best hi-hats, their best snare drum, their best ride cymbal, and the rest of the components are also good as well. The module gives you 4 outputs instead of 2 on the previous drum set we talked about, and overall it's a very, very solid drum set that is easy to recommend if you want a pad-based kit that feels larger than it really is. Meanwhile, Yamaha, you have to jump all the way up to $4,000 to go up a solid tier, and that's the Yamaha DTX 10KM. You get a better module that has direct outs on it, so that's better. The sounds are slightly higher resolution as far as I can tell, and of course you get a way nicer drum rack, and I think the ride cymbal is a little bit larger as well. Go check out my full review on this. I did a really detailed video on this. I don't think this drum set is as popular as Yamaha was hoping, but I enjoyed it. But if I had to choose this over the TD27, to be honest, I would go with the TD27. Now at this point, there's a massive price jump if you want to go all the way up to like the nicest pad-based electronic drums. So that would be the Roland TD50 K2 at $6,400, or I believe the TD50 KV2 is up in the $8,000 something price range. Those will give you their very best flagship drum module. They'll give you their nicest toms they offer. You'll get larger crash cymbals. It's just the very, very best stuff they offer. You get all the outputs you could ever want. You get more sounds built in and more editing than you could probably handle, along with individual volume faders on the drum module, which the sound man will probably force the drummer not to use. Okay, so next up, let's talk about acoustic-looking electronic drums. That was the pad-based stuff. Now we're moving ahead to the larger and also more expensive, unfortunately, electronic drums that have an acoustic look and better stage presence. So starting off at about $2,900, you got the F-Note 5. This is kind of like a club sort of sized kit. It looks really, really nice. It feels good. It plays well. And it's got the module very similar to the F-Note 3 series. If you like the idea of the F-Note 5 but wish you had more drums, like an extra floor tom, an extra splash, stuff like that, well then you can go up to the F-Note 5X. I did a whole dedicated review on this, go check it out. Again, both of these 5 series drum sets can be split to have 4 direct outputs, so they do have a lot going for them and a lot of very natural sounds as well. So next up, let's talk about the ATV A-Drums basic drum set, but paired with a Roland TD27 module. You can get into this for about the same price as the F-Note 5X, $3,800, and I think that's also a very solid option as well, and it'll give you a better module than the F-Note one. The trade-off here, of course, is that you get less drums and cymbals, but again, that's going to be up to you whether or not that makes sense. The cool thing about buying an ATV drum set is that you can buy a module to go along with it from whatever company you want. So you could buy it with their very basic ATV module, or you could buy it with like a Pearl Mimic, which is a really advanced, awesome drum module that has a ton of direct outs. It's got drum software built in from Steam Slate Drums. Really, really awesome and expensive. Or you can buy like a Roland module of your price choice. All right, so bumping up just a little bit to roughly $4,000, this is where things get a bit interesting. So you got the Roland VD 504 for $4,000, and then the F Note 7 for $200 more, $4,200. These two drum sets look very similar because of the form factor, but they do have a bunch of pros and cons. So the Roland one, in my opinion, has more sophisticated components, like the number of sensors inside of their ride cymbal, their hi-hats, and their snare is just going to be more than over on the F Note one. However, the F Note one does give you a larger high tom. It's getting you a 20-inch ride cymbal instead of the 18 on the Roland. I think even the floor tom is a little bit larger as well. Switching over to the module, the Roland one is definitely more sophisticated. You get more sounds built in. It allows you to import samples. The F Note one does not. It also gives you more sound editing options. There's just a lot going on over there. Between these two options, I personally am leaning towards the Roland one, but it will be up to you. See if you can play these in person. Now, jumping up to $5,000, this is where things get really interesting. Roland only has one drum set of this sort of shell type, and that's the VD 507. It's basically the 504, but with more components, so it's a really easy recommendation. It's a really good drum set. I've actually done a video on it. However, F Note makes things a little bit more hazy because this is where they start to cross over two different drum set lines. Up until this point, I've been talking about what I'll just call their consumer line of electronic drums for the sake of clarity, even though that's not what they're officially called. But at $5,000, they also start selling their Pro line of electronic drums. They're essentially the same thing. The major difference here is that the Pro line has their Pro module. This has a color touchscreen with better sounds built in, and also it's got a stage box on the floor with a ton of direct outs. It's actually a genius idea. I wish every company had something like this. So you kind of have to decide. Do you want to get something like the F Note Pro 500 for $5,000, 12 direct outs, better sounds, but smaller drums, or would you rather get the F Note 7X, which gives you just, a larger drum set for $200 more, but you get a worse drum module? It's kind of going to be up to you. The other thing is that F Note kind of goes ham with the number of configurations they have, so I can't include every single Pro drum set because it would take all day. There's like a dozen of them or more. Basically, around this price range, you'd probably want to get the F Note 501 for all those direct outs and then for the number of components. Even though you get the 7X, which is larger, at this point, you're buying for a venue, you probably would rather go with something a little bit smaller shell size-wise, but with a module that has a ton of I/O. All right, so now let's end things out by talking about the very best electronic drum sets if you have like an unlimited budget, $8,000 or more. At this price range, the first one you got to mention is the Roland VD 706. I've done a dedicated video on this. Go check it out if you want to know all the details. It gives you their very best module, which is the TD50X. It's got lots of outputs. It's got tons of editing. It's got very, very nice, high quality sounds. I like the sounds of this a little bit more than the TD27. I don't know exactly what's going on, but I feel like the sounds might be a tad better. So yeah, it's a really easy, bulletproof recommendation if you have an unlimited budget. Meanwhile, switching over to F Note, if you wanted something that was like a similar configuration to the Roland VD 706, you would buy something like an F Note Pro 702, their modern set as they name it. So you get the two high toms, you get a floor tom, you get like an ozone style crash, you get a splash, another regular crash, their 20-inch ride cymbal, their 14-inch hi-hats. This is an excellent drum set. Or you can go all the way and buy the 707 Complete or any sort of drum set in between. Again, they've got a million configurations. At this price range, either option would be really, really good. And this leads me to the final question. If all these drum set options are a little bit overwhelming, because again, most of the time, the person buying a drum set for a venue, they're usually not the drummer. If you feel like this is way too many options to sort of wade through, even knowing how many outputs that you need for your situation and what kind of shell sizing that you need, I would just say, if you wanted the easy, just go-to answer, buy a Roland drum set that you can afford. I'm not trying to be a Roland shill, but at the end of the day, a lot of professionals use Roland every day. I've played live with a Roland drum set before. It's just a really easy recommendation. If you feel like you're overwhelmed and there's too many options to choose from, then go with the Roland. Meanwhile, if you do have the mental bandwidth to really start comparing options and you want to drill down to the very best kit for your situation, then hopefully one of those suggestions will sort of help you out.